Pete, what is your understanding of the difference between like extraterrestrials compared to ultraterrestrials?
Well, in the simplest terms, I would connotate any extraterrestrial as being an interplanetary entity, something that comes to us from another world, a creature who was born on another planet, is indigenous to another world. With these ultraterrestrials, we're talking about something that is from our very Earth. These creatures that may have existed prior to even the birth of the first human being. You know, in ancient lore, we hear stories of angels and demons and a rebellion in heaven. In some of these legends, there were angels who did not choose a side and thus were cast down to earth. And in these legends, they became the Fae folk. Some of these elemental spirits, if you will, spirits of the earth, spirits of nature also kind of fit this bill as well. The ultra-terrestrial to me is a fascinating subject because they might very well live alongside of us. They might be able to blend in, or they exist just outside of our reality, sharing the same planet, but beyond our visible spectrum, beyond our ability to perceive them, unless they choose to be seen.
Right. I think like exactly like you're saying, there's so many people that just assume right off the bat that because of pop culture, that when we're talking about UFOs or UAPs or extraterrestrials, they immediately want to jump and talk about aliens and that these things come from another planet. Maybe they're Martians or they come from Nibiru, or they want to reach out there into deep space and discover an inhabited planet that maybe has located us and then traveled across deep space in a spaceship. But the truth is most of these people that come out of these secret programs, including like Bob Bigelow, who was involved in Skinwalker Ranch, and also like Brandon Fugel, the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch, they talk about this stuff being more like a paranormal, like a poltergeist or something. And when you dig into the ancient history, you get the same sort of phenomenon, like the almost like the Anunnaki or the Jinn, or like you were saying, these nymphs or different types of creatures, or even in the Shaver mystery. It's not that they necessarily come from outer space, but from a spectrum of reality that parallels our own, like in the multiverse, right alongside ours, or a time slippage kind of a zone. And when you look back into history, what do you think, Pete, are some of the stories that kind of indicate that?
Well, the ones that get me the most, I think, are, as mentioned, the Fae folk, the idea of fairies. I know it sounds wild, but in those encounters, we find often people experience the phenomenon of missing time. This is closely associated with the alien abduction scenario as well. And I think when you compare and contrast some of the different stories that come up through specifically Celtic legends regarding the Fae folk and alien abduction encounters, you find a lot of similarities. Likewise, you find similarities to cases of demonic oppression or vexation as well. So in the end, we wonder if these beings are a non-human intelligence that originates right here on terra firma, but is in some way imperceivable to us. And we all know that the human's limited spectrum of auditory and visual perception could indicate that there is something out there beyond what we're able to perceive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think once you realize, like when I started doing a meditation and trying to be really present in the here and now and different things like that, that one of the first things that occurred to me is that reality is very limited in that spectrum, like from the colors of the rainbow, from red up to the of ultraviolet to blue up there. That's pretty much it, and that combination. And we also only see the elements of the periodic table of elements, and as far as our physical matter, and it's very basic things and very simple ingredients that make up our entire spectrum of even physical reality. And what you can hear in your auditory spectrum is very limited as well. And it could be possible that these ultra terrestrials like live in a dimension of reality just outside of that. And even with Hal Puthoff, and he's working with like To the Stars Academy now, and he was like a predominant remote viewer at the Stanford Institute and things like that. He talks about if these UFO crafts actually were traveling through space-time and invisible to us in our spectrum of reality, that they could be moving faster than the speed of light in a sense, and would have this redshift in reality where time would almost stand still for them, and they would be able to move around through our reality almost like a video game where we're just frozen in time and abduct people or take cattle and mutilate them or whatever. But almost it would be perceived like a magical being to us, like almost like a genie or the jinn that you hear about.
Right. Now, that's a great point, the jinn. Now, the jinn are a perfect example of these kind of creatures. In Islamic lore and legend, and even as articles of faith, the jinn were created in a time before man. And the jinn had the world to themselves, but they polluted and destroyed and were a pox upon the earth. So as a curse, they were forced to live outside of what we consider reality. And if reality is malleable, if we wonder if that's possible in the right hands, these kind of ideas of time travel, of interdimensional shift, these things all become real and not just ideas in fiction and physics.
Yeah, you wonder even like if they had the technology, like let's say Area 51. Imagine if you got close to Area 51 out there, and underground they had buried this box. And that box was able to detect anybody getting close to the secret military base. And so it could zero in on you and your brain waves or subconscious mental frequencies and sort of beam like a holographic projection into your mind or an alternate reality. And when you get into these weird mysteries about ultraterrestrials, they're always tied into these underground machines or mechanisms or devices like derelict satellites or laser beam devices that project these realities into people's minds. And it sort of accounts for religious epiphanies and experiences that you hear about in time where these pillars of light appear to these people and then they suddenly have this being appear to them almost like a hologram, and it starts a whole new religion. What is your take? What is your take on these like underground machines, like sort of in the Shaver mystery? You get this.
That's exactly where I was going to go with that. The Shaver mystery. Now, according to the Shaver mystery, there was two great species that had come to Earth in the past. They were the aleins and the titans.
Right.
And they created technology, not only to in the level of machinery and such, but they created technology in the form of biomechanical organisms known as the Tero and the Dero. Right. And they left them here. They didn't start out that way. They diverged. They were originally called the Abandoned Arrow, and they have been left here. But they diverged into two distinct species, the Tero, which were benevolent and more humanoid, and the destructive Dero, who to this day, according to Richard Shaver, are responsible for snatching people from the surface and taking them down into their subterranean worlds. When I was doing research last night into various different alien species that I was talking about, I came across a lot of these stories regarding subterranean caverns under South America, subterranean bases located throughout the United States, where these aliens operate from. And even stories of the Lemurians retreating to their underground city of Telos under Mount Shasta echoes these kind of ideas of a subterranean world, of an underworld, if you will, populated by numerous beings. And this goes back to Greek mythology, the idea of this underworld, not only the Greeks, but it's replete through cultures around the world. And much like you mentioned with these appearances of what might be holographic creatures or something like that, I think of Zarathustra in the river, right away, or Abraham in the desert. Those are the first two things that come to mind. These encounters that forever changed the course of human history because these men came in contact with an intelligence not of their human understanding, something far beyond, something greater.
People of primitive cultures would almost perceive these encounters as just supernatural or paranormal or angelic or something like that, when really it could have been like an advanced technology. And again, you have not only it being like connected with this sort of strange advanced holographic technology that is like mind control devices that comes up all the time. Mm-hmm. But even in these modern books like the To the Stars Academy with Hal Puthoff and Lou Elizondo just left there, but they released these books called The Secret Machines, and they allude to the same kind of story where there's this Greek mythology sort of intertwined into the subplots of their stories, and also this concept that these extraterrestrials are sort of tied into these ancient myths, and they're almost like biological pre-programmed entities. They're not necessarily like space aliens, but they're almost more described like if you encountered it, it would almost come across like a robot or an android of some kind that's repeating a message, almost like a programmed AI sort of entity. But it's not really as physical as we'd want it to be. It's more tapping into the subconscious and things like this.